What if you could walk through the world utterly untouchable? Not because the world grew softer, but because you became forged like iron, wrapped in flame. What if no insult could penetrate your calm? No rejection could pierce your resolve? No wave of chaos could ever drown your clarity? What would your life look like if fear had no throne, doubt had no home, and the echoes of judgment fell into silence because your mind had transcended the noise? What if you were so aligned with your purpose that external opinion became irrelevant, so centered in your values that nothing external could shift your internal compass? The goal was never to remove pain to avoid fire or to seek shelter from the storm. The goal was to become the storm calm at its eye, unwavering in motion, unshaken in direction, and unyielding in presence, to reach a place where you no longer chase peace, but become it, not through suppression, but through supreme awareness, where even when fire surrounds you, you no longer flinch, because you understand the fire does not burn the forged, it refines. This is not motivation, this is evolution. A deliberate ascent out of reactive living into intentional being. Because real power is not the ability to command the world, but to command the self to move like the mountain still. Immovable, even when the winds of life howl with rage, you must understand the greatest enemy is not pain or failure. It is emotional slavery. The invisible strings that make you dance when others pull the strings that make you explode when poked withdraw, when doubted and crumble, when misunderstood. Every reaction you fail to master is a leash around your mind, dragging you into stories not your own. And that ends now, because this is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming emotionally sovereign. Because when you no longer give your energy to every insult, every trigger, every doubt, you stop bleeding power and start gathering it like a silent storm, preparing for its inevitable release. People will try to pull you off center, not because you are weak, but because your strength unsettles their fragility, and if you react, you validate them. But if you remain still, you reveal them. Because nothing reveals a person faster than your refusal to dance to their music. Understand this: the world does not owe you calm, people do not owe you kindness, life does not owe you fairness, but you owe yourself mastery. And that begins not with dominance, but with discipline, not with control over others, but with full custody of your mind, your state, your breath, your response. Because peace is not gifted, it is built, it is earned in the silent hours where you choose not to lash out, not to argue, not to prove, when everything inside you screams for war, but your higher self whispers stillness. Because stillness is not inaction, it is supreme action, restrained until necessary, held with dignity, not weakness. It is the fire you carry without setting yourself ablaze, and you cannot hold that fire if you keep letting the world tell you who you are, because you must define yourself in silence. Carve your identity through action, not reaction. Speak, not to be heard, but to be felt. And when you stop chasing applause, you start commanding respect, not through volume, but through vibration, through the unspoken frequency of someone who has seen the battlefield of their mind and chosen not to run from it, but to rule it. Because real strength is not built in comfort, it is sculpted in fire, the kind of fire that doesn't just burn your illusions, it exposes your truth. And that truth is this: no one can disturb your peace unless you open the door and hand it to them. You don't need to reply to every insult, respond to every trigger, explain every move. You need to rise in such silence that your stillness becomes your answer. Because the man who flinches at every storm lives forever in chaos, but the one who stands still in the thunder owns the sky. And let's be honest, most people live in reaction, not reflection. They are puppets of impulse, dancing to every mood, pulled by every comment, and calling it personality. But that's not self-expression. That's self-abandonment, because your triggers aren't signs of strength. They're indicators of weakness. Opportunities not to explode, but to elevate, to take the knife of discomfort and carve wisdom, not wounds. And that begins by embracing discomfort as the forge, not the enemy. Rejection is a mirror. Criticism is a lesson. Failure is a map. And if you study these instead of fleeing from them, you become dangerous, not because you attack, but because you cannot be attacked, because your sense of self is no longer on leash to strangers. Your power no longer requires permission. Your path no longer depends on applause. It is yours and yours alone, walked in silence, fortified in solitude, ignited by vision, not validation. And yes, this path is lonely, not because others leave you, but because you outgrow the need for their understanding. You begin to realize that the loudest people are often the most lost, and those who truly know themselves rarely need to speak at all, because their presence has already said enough. They don't explain their path because they're too busy walking it. They don't respond to noise because their vision drowns it out. And they don't seek to be understood because they've already made peace with who they are. And when you reach that state, everything changes. Not because the world changes, but because you do. Because you no longer bend to noise and shadows. You rise to silence and purpose. Because when you stop needing to be unshaken and become the unshakable, you stop waiting for peace and start generating it from within. And how do you build that? How do you go from reactive to relentless? It begins with awareness. The moment you feel triggered, do not react, do not move, observe, name the emotion, not as your truth, but as your weather. And just like weather, it will pass, but only if you don't build a house in it. Every time you react impulsively, you reinforce that story that you are weak, that you are owned by your surroundings. But every time you pause, even for a breath, you fracture that pattern. And if you keep breaking it, eventually it shatters, and in its place emerges a new pattern of power, of patience, of presence that doesn't need to be proven because it is self-evident. And let me tell you this, the strongest people feel everything. They just don't collapse under it. They channel it, they refine it, they alchemize pain into purpose, setbacks into strength, and chaos into calm. And they do it not once, but daily, deliberately, because mastery is not achieved. It is maintained through ritual, through repetition, through reminders that you are not your first thought. You are your chosen action, and the more you choose, the better you get at choosing, and eventually, what once triggered you becomes a whisper. What once shook you becomes your training. And what once broke you becomes your badge. And that badge is not for display. It is for direction, for reminding yourself that you have survived 1,000 storms and won. More is just another dance with destiny, because you are not here to flinch. You are here to forge, not here to beg for peace, but to become it, and not here to perform, but to embody. And if you embody anything, let it be this, the rare and radiant power of someone who no longer needs the world to approve in order to proceed. Because when you no longer chase the world begins to follow. Not because you asked, but because you've become magnetic, not through charisma, but through command, the quiet command of one who has learned that indifference to noise is the gateway to depth. That real freedom is found not in external liberation, but in internal dominion. and that the ultimate flex is walking through fire with a calm face, because the battle was won long before the world ever saw you. It was won in the silence, it was won in the breath, it was won every time you chose not to be shaken, and every time you return to that choice, you are not just protecting your energy, you are amplifying it. You are turning wounds into wisdom, reaction into response, and life into leadership. And in a world addicted to attention, chaos, and noise, the calm one becomes the signal, not the static, the light, not the flare, and the force, not the friction. Because when nothing outside you has the power to break what is inside, you have arrived, not at perfection, but at power, not at fame, but at focus, not at safety, but at strength. The strength to let people talk while you build the strength to let them misunderstand while you transcend the strength to let go of needing to be seen and instead become impossible to ignore, not because you shouted louder, but because you never had to. And that is how you become untouchable. Because untouchable is not an identity you claim. It is a reality you construct, breath by breath, decision by decision, forged in solitude, where no one is clapping, no one is watching. And still, you choose mastery over mediocrity. You choose discipline over drama. You choose to be the stillness that turns chaos into clarity. And this choice is not made once. It is made 1,000 times before breakfast. It is made when your phone lights up with negativity, when your plans fall apart, when the voices in your head begin to whisper doubts, disguised as reason, and yet you do not fold, you do not tremble. You return to the breath, to the anchor, to the part of you that was never born and can never be broken, because your essence is not your thoughts, not your moods, not your mistakes, is your awareness. And when you live from that place, from that sacred space between reaction and response, you move differently, you lead differently, and you radiate a power that no resume can capture, no award can validate, because it is not performance. It is presence. It is the earned weight of self-ownership so complete that nothing can be added to it and nothing can be taken away. And from this place, you stop needing to prove anything, because your being becomes the proof. Your stillness becomes your sword, and your silence becomes your sanctuary. A space where only truth can enter and all illusions melt. And when you speak from this place, it is not to impress, it is to impact, to elevate, to align others, not with your ego, but with their own essence. And when you walk into a room, you don't seek the spotlight, you bring the sun, not because you are above others, but because you have gone deeper into yourself, into the labyrinth where most fear to walk, into the shadow, into the wound, into the ache of being human, and the fire of becoming whole. And now you wear that journey not as a story, but as an aura, as a vibration that cannot be explained but can never be ignored. And you become the one people look to, not because you say the right things, but because you are the right presence. Not because you offer solutions, but because you radiate sovereignty. And sovereignty is the new success. Not owning things, but owning yourself, not conquering others, but mastering the only kingdom that ever mattered, the one within. And you realize then that nothing outside of you is truly yours, not your titles, not your followers, not even your body or your time, but what is yours forever is the way you choose to show up, the way you walk through pain without bowing to it, the way you breathe through uncertainty without losing your rhythm, and the way you hold the line of your values when the world sells you cheaper alternatives. And this is not philosophy in a book. This is philosophy in your bloodstream, the living wisdom of the Stoics, who taught that what you suffer is not the event, but your judgment of the event. The Buddhists, who taught that attachment is the root of all suffering. The existentialists, who said, you are not a product of the world, you are a project you choose to build. And from this synthesis, you become the new warrior, not armored in ego but naked in truth, not loud but luminous, not invincible but invulnerable to nonsense, to petty games, to the pull of a world that would rather see you small than see you sovereign. And you must choose every day to rise above that noise, not by fleeing from it, but by transcending it, letting it pass through you like wind, through an unmoved flame, because that flame is purpose, that flame is integrity, that flame is a kind of quiet fire that consumes excuses and leaves only excellence in its place. And when you live like this, you will not be liked by all, but you will be respected by the few who matter. You will not be praised by everyone, but you will walk with a peace that needs no praise. And that is the shift, that you no longer look for peace, but become it. No longer seek permission, but create it. No longer wait for the storm to pass, but become the one who walks through it without losing form. And in doing so, you send a signal to the world that says not, don't test me, but you can't move me. Because I have already tested myself in ways you will never see. I have already sat with my fear and learned its name. I have already walked through my self-doubt and refused to live there. I have already buried the need for validation and planted in its place the seed of vision. And I water that vision daily, not with likes or compliments, but with discipline and devotion and detachment from anything that seeks to pull me back into the smallness I was never meant to inhabit. And from this place you live, not to impress, but to express the fullness of your spirit, not to fit in, but to rise out, not to be seen, but to see clearly. And now, finally, with all illusions burned away and all masks dropped, you begin to understand what it means to be truly untouchable. It means you are no longer at war with the world, because you are no longer at war with yourself. Because when the war within ends, the battles outside lose their grip, their sharpness dulled by your refusal to flinch, their power diffused by your refusal to be baited. And suddenly, the chaos you once feared becomes background noise. The distractions you once chased now dissolve into irrelevance, and every temptation to prove yourself fades in the presence of your own inner knowing. Because this is the truth most never discover, that the loudest battlefield is the one between your ears. And when you master that terrain, you master every terrain. Because now you move with conviction, not hesitation, with clarity, not confusion, with grounded certainty that does not need to be defended, because it simply is. And from that place, you no longer chase opportunities, you create them. You no longer seek leadership, you embody it, not with bravado, but with presence. The kind of presence that turns heads, not through volume, but through gravity. The kind of presence that walks into a storm and does not ask the sky to be calm, but brings its own weather. And that weather is forged from every moment you chose silence over shouting, reflection over retaliation, vision over vengeance. And now you move like the seasons, inevitable, essential, and aligned with forces deeper than circumstance. Because you are no longer negotiating with fear or failure. You are no longer trying to fit a mold made for a lesser version of you. You are building from within a new standard, a new frequency, and those not meant to walk with you will fall away not because you rejected them, but because your silence showed them a mirror they could not bear to look into. And that's not cruelty, that's clarity. Because you cannot carry everyone and rise, and you cannot grow if you're still shrinking yourself to keep others comfortable. So now you stand not in arrogance, but in alignment, with a spine made of principles and a heart made of fire and a mind so sharp it slices through lies before they can take root. And from this alignment, you stop needing explanations. You stop fearing judgment, because you've learned that what people think of you has more to do with them than with you. And you start walking through life like a master of energy, not draining it in defense, not leaking it in panic, but storing it, channeling it, sharpening it, until your very gaze carries the weight of 1,000 hours of solitude, 1,000 decisions to choose growth over gossip, purpose over pettiness, and truth over temporary comfort. And when you walk like that, when your mere presence is a message, you stop needing to talk so much, because people feel the frequency, the depth, the quiet edge that says, I have nothing to prove and everything to protect. And what I protect is not ego, it's essence, it's integrity. And that is the rarest kind of power in a world drunk on appearances. Because while others posture, you prepare. While others react, you respond. While others seek to be seen, you seek to see clearly. And in that seeing, you navigate life like a warrior monk, grounded but dangerous, silent but unsleeping. And this doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you feel everything and still hold the line. Because you have trained your nervous system to breathe where others break, to pause where others panic, to hold space where others spill chaos. And that makes you rare. Not because you were born different, but because you chose to become different in a world that demanded your conformity. And every time you chose discomfort over distraction, every time you chose solitude over noise, every time you sat with your emotions instead of unleashing them, you were building this fortress of calm, this inner sanctuary no storm can shake. And now you walk not with force, but with flow, not with aggression, but with awareness. And you do not need the path to be perfect, because you are perfecting yourself daily. And that process, that ritual of refinement, that is the real legacy, not what you post, not what you wear, but who you are when no one's watching, what you choose when no one's clapping, and how you carry yourself when the weight of life tries to press you into someone you are not. Because in that pressure, you remember, you are the sculptor, not the clay, the architect, not the debris. And you build in every breath a structure so sacred, no criticism can crumble it, no failure can stain it. Because it is made not of fame, but of focus, and not of applause, but of alignment. And that alignment is your edge, your armor, your light. And once you've felt it, once you've walked in it, nothing else satisfies, nothing else fits, and nothing else can take its place. And so you keep going, not because it's easy, not because anyone claps, but because turning back would mean betraying the deepest part of yourself. Because to regress into comfort now would be to unlearn everything the fire has taught you, to forget the language of silence, the weight of breath, the sacred rhythm of restraint that has become your armor and your art. And so you press on, not with noise, but with knowing, not with validation, but with vision. And that vision doesn't come from dreams alone, but from the pain you've digested, the fears you've dissected, the days you walked alone when no one understood your silence, but you kept walking anyway, because you knew that the real path would be walked without maps. That mastery was not marked by applause, but by the kind of focus so deep it cut through illusion and refused to be shaken by the trivial, the passing, the shallow chaos that grips most people and keeps them spinning in circles of reactivity, but not you, not anymore. Because you are not here to spin, you are here to rise. And rising is not glamorous, it's grueling. It's the daily grind of killing old narratives, shedding worn identities, and walking into the unknown with only one certainty: that you will not abandon yourself again, that you will not hand over your power to be liked, to be safe, to be understood, because you've come too far and seen too much to betray your mission for the comfort of conformity. And now everything you do is calibrated not by what feels good, but by what builds you. And what builds you often breaks you first, cracks you open so that something real can emerge. Something forged, not from desire, but from discipline, not from mood, but from meaning. And now your life is no longer a reaction to the world, it is a declaration to it, a statement made in stillness that says, I will not be moved. Not because I'm invincible, but because I've met every part of myself that once made me fragile. And I sat with those parts until they became friends, until they stopped screaming for attention and started standing as guards at the gate of my peace. And that's what makes you dangerous, now not your size, not your speed, but your sovereignty, the way you own your inner world. So completely that nothing external can unseat your focus, and that ownership radiates. It speaks louder than any speech. It shakes the room, not through sound, but through presence. And presence is the new superpower in a world addicted to distraction. And you have it because you earned it, because while others scrolled, you studied yourself. While others numbed, you noticed. While others escaped, you endured. And now your pain has become purpose. Your weakness has become weaponized into wisdom. And your triggers are no longer landmines, they're launch pads, launching you deeper into self-mastery, into a life lived not by chance, but by choice, where every breath is sacred, every step intentional, and every reaction filtered through the lens of legacy. Because you no longer live for the moment, you live for what the moment builds. And what it builds is the rarest kind of human, one who is unmoved, not because they are cold, but because they are clear, not because they feel less, but because they've learned to transmute feeling into fuel, chaos into clarity, and noise into nothingness. And that alchemy, that's your art now, your offering, your edge. And no one can take it because no one gave it to you. You carved it out of silence, shaped it with suffering, and now you wear it like invisible armor, not to hide, but to reveal what happens when a soul stops trying to be accepted and starts embodying its own authority. When a mind stops reacting and starts reigning. When a life stops waiting for the world to be still and instead becomes the stillness the world needs. And in that stillness, you find everything you were looking for, not out there, but within, where it always was, waiting for the day you'd stop running, stop pretending, stop performing, and finally become. Then let us continue deeper into the mind, further into mastery, past the edge where most turn back, but where you now press forward with intention so sharp it slices through the fog of doubt like light through darkness. Because what you've built isn't just a mindset, it's a fortress, not made of stone or steel, but of choices to stay silent when noise seduces, to stay calm when chaos demands your collapse, to remain devoted to your direction when every lesser version of you begs for comfort and compromise. And that is the real work. The unseen battle where the world may not give you credit, but your soul does. Where applause is replaced by alignment. Where the crowd fades, but your clarity sharpens. Because now you see what most miss, that the world is not your enemy. Your reactions are. That adversity isn't your downfall. attachment is. And now that you've severed the strings that made you dance for approval, for validation, for the shallow comfort of fitting into places you were never meant to shrink into, you finally walk upright, not just in body, but in spirit, in sovereignty. And now everything shifts, not because the storm has calmed, but because you have. And the eye of the storm isn't something you find, it's something you become. And in that stillness, decisions become easier because they're no longer tangled in the need to please, in the fear of judgment, in the illusion that anything external defines your worth. And in that simplicity lies profound power, the kind of power that doesn't need to be announced or defended because it simply is. Undeniable, rooted, real. And you begin to move through the world with the quiet assurance of someone who no longer needs to be chosen, because you've chosen yourself, who no longer fears being misunderstood because you've stopped misunderstanding your own power. And from that deep well of self-trust flows a life that is no longer reactive, but radiant, tradient, with purpose, with discipline, with fire so contained it warms without burning, cuts without wounding, leads without shouting. And this is the paradox of presence. The less you try to prove it, the more powerful it becomes. Because it's not about what others see, it's about what you carry, what you've earned in the silent hours, in the dark corners of your mind, where you once doubted your strength but stayed anyway. Stayed and stared into the void until it blinked first, until the shadows bent to your stillness. And now that stillness is your state, not by accident, but by design, a result of thousands of tiny choices that no one saw, but that now make you impossible to ignore. And this is the level most will never reach, not because they can't, but because they won't. Because it requires more than motivation. It demands metamorphosis, the death of distraction, the burial of blame, the dismantling of every excuse you've ever used to hide from the magnitude of your own potential. But you are done hiding, done shrinking, done softening your edges for a world that cannot hold your sharpness, because your sharpness is not a weapon. It is a beacon. It carves your path. It pierces illusion. It slices through mediocrity until only essence remains. And that essence is what you now live for, walk for, breathe for, because you are no longer interested in being everything to everyone. You are committed to being the deepest, clearest version of yourself. And that version is dangerous, not because it destroys, but because it reveals. What it reveals, what it awakens in others, is the same question that once woke you. What if I stopped reacting and started rising? What if I stopped performing and started embodying? What if I stopped looking outside and finally turned inward and realized the peace I crave, the strength I envy, the power I chase was never out there, but always here, waiting for me to sit still long enough to claim it?